Hello class, I know some of you have found factoring quite challenging, so I put together this little video with some examples that hopefully help you. Okay, so here are the steps to factoring. If you don't have them in your notes, you need to write them down. It will help you guide you through all the examples we've been doing in class, and if you want to practice on your own. So let's look at the first example of x squared minus 17x plus 70. Our first step is to factor out the GCF, but GCF here is 1, and if we factor that out, it doesn't change the problem, so we're going to go on to step 2. Step 2 has us to create the factor chart doing A times C and looking for factors that add to B. So in this case, A times C gives me a positive 70, and I'm going to look for things that add to give me a negative 17. Factors of 70 are 1 times 70, and that adds to give me 71. 2 times 35, that will add to give me 37. 5 times 14 adds to give me 19. And then 7 times 10, it will add to give me 17. Notice that is a positive 17, but I need a negative 17. So this is when we get to start thinking about our positive and negatives. I realize that if I multiply two negatives, negative 7 times negative 10, I get positive 70, and if I add negative 7 and negative 10, I get negative 17. So these are the factors I'm looking for, so I'm going to use these factors to break up the B term. Okay, so we're going to break up the B term using negative 7x and negative 10x. We bring down our x squared and our 70. We split the problem in the middle, and we're going to look at the left side. We're going to factor out the GCF on the left side only. Alright, so when I look at that, I have an x squared minus 7x. My GCF of the numbers are 1, so I'm not going to write that down, but we always go for the lowest exponent. I have 2 here and 1 here, so I'm going to factor out a single x. X squared divided by x is 1x, and then negative 7 divided by x just gives me a negative 7. You bring down the sign in the middle. I copy and paste the factor x minus 7, and then I look for what I need out here. 10 divided by 1 is 10, and 70 divided by 7 is 10, so I know I need a 10 here. Remember to group with a swoop. We write down the one factor, x minus 7, and I make the other factor with the terms on the outside of the parentheses. That'll be x minus 10. I don't have a GCF from the beginning of the problem, so I am done. I'm put a box around it. I'm off to the next problem. Our next example is 3x squared plus 6x minus 45. Okay, so the smallest number here is 3, and 3 divides into 6 and 45, so we're going to factor out the 3. Okay, so when I do that, I'm left with 3 times the quantity of x squared plus 2x minus 15. My next step here is to create the factor chart doing A times C and adds to B. Make the chart, and notice now that our A is now 1, so I have 1 times negative 15 gives me negative 15, and I want to see what adds to give me a positive 2. My factors of negative 15 are 1 and negative 15, which adds to give me negative 14, 3 times negative 5, which adds to give me negative 2. Okay, I need a positive 2, and again, so this is when we have to pay attention to our signs. I realize if I change my negative to 3, negative 3 times 5 gives me my negative 15, and then that will add to give me my positive 2. So these are the factors I'm going to use to break up that B term to x. So I break up the 2x using negative 3 and positive 5. Bring down your x squared and your 15. Keep in mind, guys, I'm now using this factored form. I'm not using the original problem to factor. Split it down the middle, and we're going to factor the GCF here on the left side. So x squared minus 3x, I realize that I have a single x, so I'm going to factor out the single x. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 3x divided by x is just negative 3. Bring down my sign in the middle, copy and paste, and then I need to figure out what we have on the outside of this factor. 5 divided by 1 is 5, negative 15 divided by 3, so I need a positive 5 here. Group with a swoop, write down the one factor, x minus 3. My other factor is made with the numbers on the outside, or the values outside, x plus 5. I had a GCF, I wrote it down, I put a box around it, that is my final answer. Off to the next problem. Okay, our next example is 10x squared minus 7x minus 16. We're going to factor out the GCF. The smallest number here is 10, but 10 does not divide evenly into 78 or 16, so you have to look at the other factors of 10. The other factors of 10 are 1, 2, and 5. of these, 2 divides into everything else, so that is the GCF, so we need to divide it out. So my equation now becomes 2 times 5x squared minus 39x minus 8. Next thing to do is to make the factor chart. Creating A times C adds to B. My A is now 5, my C is negative 8, so that multiplies to give me negative 40. And I'm looking for things that multiply to give me negative 39. Factors of negative 40 are 1 times negative 40, and that adds to be negative 39. So luckily I don't have to make a big factor chart here. These are the factors that add to give me negative 39, so I'm going to use these to break up the negative 39. Break it up. I'm going to break it up to using negative 40 plus 1x, bring down the 5x and the negative 8, split it down the middle, and factor out the left side. Okay, when I factor out the left side, I see that I have a 5 and 40. 5 divides into 40, so I'm going to factor that out along with a single x. So 5x squared divided by 5x gives me a single x. Negative 40x divided by 5 gives me minus 8. Bring down my sign in the middle, copy and paste, and then I need to figure out what goes here. X divided by x is 1, and then 8 divided by 8 is 1, so I'll place a 1 there. Group with a swoop, write down the factor x minus 8, write the other factor with the values on the outside of the parentheses, 5x plus 1, bring down my GCF, and that is my final answer. Okay, our next example here is 6x squared minus 216. The smallest number is here is 6. 6 goes into 216, so I can factor it out. My new problem is 6 times x squared minus 36. I'm going to make my factor chart for A times C adds to B. Notice the B term is missing, so we say that this has a value of 0. So I'm going to look for values that multiply to give me negative 36, but adds to be 0. So my factors in negative 36 are 1 and negative 36, which adds to be negative 35. 2 times negative 18 gives me a negative 16. 3 times negative 12 gives me a negative 9. 4 times negative 9 will give me a negative 5. And 6 times negative 6 gives me 0. So those are the factors that I'm looking for to split up that 0 term that we don't have written down. So I'm going to split up 0 using 6x and negative 6x. Bring down your x squared and your negative 36. Split it down the middle. Factor your left side. On the left side I have an x in common. So I'm going to divide x squared by x and get single x. 6x divided by x gives me a positive 6. Bring down my sign in the middle. Copy and paste. 6x divided by, you have a 6x divided by 1 gives me 6. 36 divided by 6 is 6, so I write down 6. Group with a swoop. Write down your factor. Make the other factor the values on the outside. Bring down your GCF. Put a box around it. Final answer. Okay, next example here, I have 4x squared minus 20x. Okay, the smallest number here is 4, so you're going to factor out the 4. Also, both terms have the same variable, so you can factor out the lowest exponent. In this case, I'm going to factor out a single x also. So if I factor out 4x, I get 4x divided by 4x gives me a single x, and 20x divided by x gives me 5. Okay, after factoring out this GCF, I notice that there's not an x squared term left, so the problem is factored completely. Put a box around it and you're done. I hope these examples help you. Keep practicing. Get help from me or some other teachers in school if you're still struggling. Have a good night.